Hello everyone. With the latest Playwright release, which is version 1.61, Playwright has added a new feature that allows us to automate web authentication flows that uses passkeys. So in this video, we are going to talk about that one. Um, so if we go to Playwright documentation under the release notes, version 1.61, you can see there's a new feature called WebAuthn Passkeys, and there they mention that new credentials virtual authenticator available via browser context credentials that lets tests register passkeys and answer navigator.credentials.create and or navigator credentials.get ceremonies in the page without needing a hardware keys. And also it says it'll work in all the browsers. So let's go into this new API, this credentials class, which is under the API section in Playwright documentation. So it mentions that credentials is a virtual WebAuthn authenticator scoped to a browser context. And yep, let's test register passkeys and answer navigator.create ceremonies in the page without a real authenticator or hardware security key. So let's first of all take a look at what is WebAuthn and what does that mean. So I found a website resource that describes um, a good resource for understanding the WebAuthn. So if I go here, there's an overview mentioning that WebAuthn is a short form for web authentication, and it is an API specification that lets application to use strong and secure authentication method for user registration and login. So basically, this is a more secure and very easy workflow for users without needing password when they register or login, so they can use the pass keys instead, such as USB security keys or security hardware elements integrated with a laptop, such as fingerprint scanning. And how it works, as it mentioned here, these authenticators rely on public key cryptography to provide secure registration and authentication of account. To achieve this, user completes a registration ceremony. This is an important keyword to associate an authenticated device with their account, which generates a public and private key pair. This is again another important uh, keyword in WebAuthn that we need to understand. So if we go down here, there's detail about the passkeys. Basically, what passkeys are: a term that describes the public and private key pair generated by the authenticator in the user's credentials in WebAuthn world. So similar to how passwords are term used, the public and private key pair that is generated by the authenticator is the passkey that we referred to in this case. And there's some important stuff that we need to understand under this basics section. So in the WebAuthn, there are a couple of parties involved. The first major party is user who wants to access the protected resource, like when you register and login, so you want to access that the stuff, the things in that website. And the second party involved is the web application that actually holds that protected resource, and that requires the user to be authenticated in order to access it. In the WebAuthn world, that entity is called the relying party, or RP. If we the word relying party is something that we need to keep in mind, because it will be used in the Playwright documentation as well. And again, there's something we need to understand here. The authenticator. It's again the authenticator is a piece of dedicated hardware or hardware subsystem, or it can be a software that is able to generate public or private key pair. And down here it says about ceremonies. In when a passkey is generated, there are two ceremonies occurs. Those are registration and authentication ceremony. So in this website, there are two diagrams that are very easy to understand. If we go here, we can see the flow, how it occurs. So for example, this is the registration ceremony. So there there are three roles involved here: client, server, and the authenticator. So the first thing occurs is someone goes to the website and provide the email address saying that want to register in this website. So server will check whether that user already exists in the server, and if not, it will send a request to the client, respond to the client saying there are, if you want to register, I have some options you need to give to me. Basically it'll say if you want to register in my site, yeah, provide me uh, a valid public key, and when you generate the public key, use these things, something like that. And at that point, the client or the browser will trigger the WebAuthn API, and it will try to generate a new passkey. Once it's generated the new passkey, it will provide the public key, but it will keep the private key, and then the client will provide the public key back to the relying party or the server, and then finally server will store, it will basically validate whether it successfully given all the send back all the um, required options as it requested. If it is the case, then it will validate. If it is successful, then it will keep the public key. That's about the registration ceremony. And the next one that we need to look at is the authentication ceremony. So basically, again, the client, server, and authenticator is there. First of all, once user goes in, and if it already registered in the site, by providing the email, it will ask to sign in, and once the server received that request, it'll say like okay, sign this data so I know it's you, something like that. So the next it'll at that point it'll again uh, trigger the WebAuthn API, and it'll ask Authenticator to sign in the data using the private key it has generated previously. Once the sign in has happened, it'll Authenticator will provide back the sign in data to the client. Once that is done, it'll provide back as a proof uh, the to the server, and it'll validate the signature. If it is successful, it'll say it'll successfully log in the user. Okay, now coming back to the Playwright documentation for Credentials API. So going down, so it says that there are two ways of using the Credentials API. The first one is by seeding a known credential. If you know the credential like public private key pair, so you can use this option. But if you don't know the credentials already, um, it allows you to capture the passkey while registering and then reuse it again in your other tests, following tests. So if we go further down, it says about the methods that Credentials API has. There's this create method. It will seed a virtual WebAuthn credentials and return that one. So the important note here is that so we have to call this line credentials.install before we navigating to a page that uses WebAuthn. So before we call page dot go to particular URL, we have to call the credentials.install, which means yeah, as in here. Okay, we'll come to the demo and see that part. And going down, so the arguments are RPID, which is the relying party ID, and there are options. ID, it is for the generated credential, and the ID for the generated credential, and the private key, the public key, and the user handle, which is the ID for the user, email ID that is should be generated by the server Reliant party, and again it'll return all these items in the object. And next it specify another method called delete, which removes the credential from the authenticator by using the ID. Yeah, and going down further, it has a method called get that will return every credential currently held by the authenticator. So if you want to find the details, like all the items, all the credentials held by the context, we can call credentials credentials.get method, and going down the install. This is the method that install the virtual WebAuthn authenticator into the context. So, and that how it does that by overriding the navigator.credentials.create, the uh, the JavaScript line which triggers uh, the user to provide um, their fingerprint or anything like authenticator. Yeah, and yeah, required until credentials.install is called, no interception is in place. So this is important because if we don't use credentials.install, there's no point in using credentials.create. So it's very important we use credentials.install first and then call either credentials.create or credentials.get methods. Okay, now let's uh, do a demo. Let's try to implement um, a scenario using the credential API. For the demo, I'm going to use this website, um, which allows us to try uh, WebAuthn login, registration and login flow. Before going to the code walkthrough, let's try to manually try this. Try registering dummy email and authenticate it once it's registered. So I'm going to give a dummy email test 123 demo at mail.com. So you can see if once we click on register, so it so I have one password in my browser, so it acts as the authenticator and it tries to it has created the passkey and asking me option my permission to save it. So I'll say save. So now it has successfully registered, which means it should have saved the private key in the authenticator and should have registered my public key generated for this user in the this website's server. So now if I try to authenticate, so now it prompts my one password and asking my permission to sign in. So if I say sign in, so it will successfully log in and show this message. So this will be the scenario that we are going to try to automate using the credentials API in the Playwright. Okay, I already have Playwright installed in my project and I have created a new file for this test. So what we are basically going to do is we are going to first register a user and then capture the passkey, and then we are going to authenticate using that captured credentials. Let's get started. So I'm going to create a test for the registration. First say registration. I'm going to use it. Then let's first go to website. I'm going to accept this line C. Let's inspect to see that's the correct element locator. Yeah, example underscore username. It's a text box. Example under username. I'm going to change this to 345. And then once we enter the username, we can just click on the register button, register. Yes, click. So this is the message we get. Success. Now try to authenticate. Yeah, this is correct. We'll put assertion there. Okay, this is the flow, but so in order to capture the passkey, we need to have this line the install credential install before we navigating into the pages, because it needs to install the virtual authenticator is into the context. So we can do that by having this line where credentials.install, and so once we have the success message, let's try to capture the credential. Yeah, copy this line here. It will store the captured credential, and we have to change the RPID to WebAuthn.io because that is the domain we are using. And let's store it in a file. I'm renaming it to passkey underscore test because I have something called passkey.json already. Accept that. And I have to import the FS module here. And we can close our context at the end. So let's try running this test now. So if it is successful, we should be able to see a new file called password key test underscore JSON generated once the test is finished. Let's try running this now. Yeah, it successfully generated the file and the test has passed. If we let's try opening the file to see what's in there. So as you can see, it has captured all the options that it has returned as mentioned in here. In the documentation, it has returned the ID RPID generated is WebAuthn.io for the domain, and it has returned the user handle, also the private key and the public key. So now we have the passkey file. So let's try to seed it and use it into our authentication test. So let's create a new test. Suggest. So we are going to use this file password key, and so we have to call this time we have to create the credential instead of getting it. Let's do that. We have to first pass the RPID and then the credential file we received from here. And next we'll go to the website. The button is authenticate. So at this point, once we go to the website, we don't need to do anything. It'll we forgot something here. We should add the virtual authenticator into this context first before we creating the file here. And now we can wait for the success message. You are logged in. Wait. Expect. I think that should be it. Let's try running this. So this should pick the credentials from the password key underscore test JSON file and should install the credentials virtual authenticator, and then it should create a passkey inside that and should be to the authentication using that one. So let's try running this now. Yeah, it successfully logged in the user. So one thing that we should keep in mind is we should not when we commit this to the GitHub, we should not commit these files, passkey files. So make sure that we should add it to gitignore file before we commit or push these changes to the GitHub or remote repository. I think that's all I have to cover. I plan to cover in this video. So thank you for watching. See you in the next one.